Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, March 15th. And my name is Heather Kraus. I'm a data scientist and mathematical statistician and the founder of an organization called We All Count, which is a project about getting as much equity as possible into all of our data work. And I'm very, very happy to see a lot of familiar faces joining us for Talking Data Equity and some new folks too. So welcome. Let me give you a little bit of an idea of what the kind of housekeeping run of show looks like at Talking Data Equity. Talking Data Equity is an informal gathering that we host most Fridays at this time, not every Friday, but most Fridays at this time. And the Zoom link stays the same. The idea behind Talking Data Equity is to create a space where anybody from any country, from any sector who's interested in improving the work that they do around data and equity can come and share resources, share ideas, share struggles, share things that are working, share things that aren't working, and definitely feel like you're not alone. Like there are other people working on these projects and these ideas too. And sometimes at Talking Data Equity, we are lucky enough to have special guests. And today is one of those days. And I am personally extremely excited about the special guests that we have today. So I'm going to do a brief introduction to our special guests. Then they're going to share their project for a little while. And while they're sharing their slides and sharing their stories and examples, I'm going to ask that you keep your microphone turned off, and that if you want to ask a question or have a chat with other people who are in the meeting, that you do that using the Zoom chat. And then when we are done sharing those slides with our special guests, then we'll have a question and answer period at the end of our hour. And at that point, if you want to turn your microphone on, you can go ahead and do that and ask questions. But for the whole hour, feel free to use the Zoom chat, ask questions, connect with people in the room, and share suggestions and comments in the chat at any point. All right. So I am really, really excited to introduce to you two people whose work I admire a lot, who have been involved in some really important and cool work. The first is Alyssa Marchant, uses she, her pronouns, and Alyssa serves as the director of Innovation Network. She is passionate about building equitable evaluation plans that can shift the power to those closest to the issue. With over 10 years of experience in the social sector, Alyssa has led learning and evaluation projects on a range of issues in the advocacy space, including early childhood health equity and electric mobility. She uses her background in social work and storytelling to center the whole person in learning projects and is the co-author to the project that we're going to be talking a lot about today, which is the Equitable Communication Guide for Evaluators. And our second special guest is Sherry Golson Mickens, who also uses she, her pronouns. She's a senior associate at the Innovation Network. And Shelley has extensive research and evaluation experience working with nonprofits, including social sector agencies and libraries. She facilitates data-driven decision-making on organizational and community levels and centers culturally relevant, equitable, and principle-focused approaches in her work. This is super cool because she also brings to the evaluation a strong clinical research perspective, having worked in the clinical research field. Shelley is the co-author of the Equitable Communications Guide that we're going to be talking about. And something I should have said in the housekeeping section of today is that in addition to sharing the recording with you, we will also be sharing all of the links and resources that Shelley and Alyssa talk about and reference. So don't worry, you don't have to kind of write everything down. All right, so I will stop talking now. And Alyssa and Shelley, thank you so much. I'm so excited for you to share this really, really cool piece of work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. Honestly, I am such an admirer of yours and so grateful for you creating this community. I've gained so much from it myself, and I really feel lucky to be able to contribute something back. So hello, everyone. As Heather mentioned, my name is Alyssa. I'm the director at Innovation Network, and we are a nonprofit consulting firm that evaluates advocacy, organizing, and power building initiatives. And as Heather said, we are talking today about equity in our data communication. So specifically, that's more about like how we're talking about the way that we share back our findings through our reporting, presentations, things like that. And I will say that Shelly and I had a little bit of fun thinking about a name for the presentation today about talking data equity. It's very literal. It's what we're doing today. But just to give you a little quick background on kind of where we're coming from and where this information comes from. So Innovation Network has intentionally been transforming towards equity in our practices, both internally and externally over the last few years. And so that means that, you know, we've all our team has been trained by Heather through We All Count, thinking about incorporating equity in our data practices. But it also means that we've been thinking about our organizational policies and other practices. And I've been running the communications at our organization for a long time. My first career was in communication. So when I started looking around to think like, how do you do this? Like, how should I think about equity the way that I'm communicating and sharing our findings from our projects? And I just could not find a lot of information about that. And so what we decided to do is we wanted to learn from others who are starting to research this or are just kind of compiling the ideas themselves. So we were able to kind of pull thoughts from many different fields, from marketing, from organizations who are centered on equity and trying to build that into their own practices, from research, and pull it all together into one guide that we could use, but also want to share it out with others. And so that's what we're talking about today, is some of the lessons that we've learned from that research. And I do want to shout out the images that you see in our presentation today are by the talented Kayla Bovayer, who is a senior associate evaluator with us. So we love her and love her work. I'm so glad that she has such talent. And so I'm going to turn to Shelly to get us started.
Thank you, Alyssa. And I want to second what Alyssa said too, and thank Heather for this wonderful community and this opportunity to share. But with that, I would like to jump right in. We have a lot that we would like to share with you today, and we're excited to hear your thoughts. So before we get into it, though, what we want to talk about are some kind of general concepts. The what are we talking about? The why and the how. So what do we mean by equitable communications? What we're talking about here, and Alyssa really already scratched the surface a bit, is we're talking about how we can better communicate our findings in a way that is accessible, is engaging, and is relevant, but not in the traditional sense of relevance. We're talking about relevancy to the communities who contribute to our studies. And this is so important, especially now, because this is fairly a new concept, the shifting of priorities and the shifting of responsibility. When we say shifting the priorities, we're talking about sharing our findings, again, with those who are directly related to and who can benefit from what we are working on, the individuals, the communities that we're collecting data with, hopefully, but sometimes it is from, but not just the funder. Our priorities have shifted. But while we're shifting priorities, we're also shifting responsibility. We're not coming in with the idea that it's the community's responsibility to receive what we give. We are shifting the responsibility to ourselves as evaluators, funders, program leaders. The onus is on us to share our findings in a way that is accessible to those that deserve and have contributed. It's theirs, it belongs to them, we're giving it back. We want to break down the barriers to access, use the information, and not assume that if we build it, they will come. We're changing that thought process and being more intentional. So there's a metaphor, a great metaphor that Heather uses in her training about a microscope, which resonates with me because of my background in biology and biomedical sciences. But that microscope, who's looking through the lens? Who's focused? What is the focus on within the lens? But with us, we're switching it. With equitable comms, we're switching to a megaphone. Who gets to speak into that megaphone? And where is it pointed? Hopefully you can see me trying to gesture with the megaphone in my hand. That's what this is. All right. All right, so why? It sounds kind of strange to even ask, why is this important? We're in talking data equity. Everyone here values equity. We know why this is important, but we do have to say it out loud. Equity is for everybody. When we help create communities where everyone feels valued, where everyone is supported, where everyone is heard, everyone has resources to their access, it creates a better world for all of us. But we do have to say it out loud because that doesn't always resonate, or it's not always recognized right away. And so when we say specifically why we're doing this, why does this matter to us? This gives us the opportunity to authentically share findings in an inclusive and, very importantly, a respectful way. That is very important to us. Also, this reflects our diverse reality. We do not all look alike. We all look around a room. We don't see the same thing. We look different. We experience the world different. We have experiences in the world differently. This helps to reflect the reality, the real reality, and it helps us to contribute to the future that we want to see. And then, very importantly, we want to give a platform and build relationships with people who are marginalized, and help to dismantle the historical oppression that has been experienced. So again, the bottom line is that the world functions better with equity. We all win when we are all happy and healthy together. Okay, so I'm only going to come off of my soapbox just a little bit here, slight decrease from my soapbox to say, equity is about success. It's for all of us, but we are all learning. We have not mastered. Our colleague Caleb very beautifully illustrated what this looks like in real time. It's us championing, us doing the work, and us, we stumbled because we did something wrong, because we are learning. And as long as we get up and continue to work hard, make sure that when we have harmed, that we are addressing those harms in a healthy way with those that we have harmed, we can continue together. This is a really great opportunity for us to learn together. So now I can get into our guide and the how. So how do we do this? What we want to share with you today are some key findings from the research that we've done on equitable communications. I think Alyssa beautifully covered it in the intro where she was talking about the fact that this was something that was really important to us in our internal work as an organization. And we found that there were a lot of resources that were separate, but really we wanted to see them in one place. And so this is an opportunity for us to shout out all the work that has been done, while also bringing it into one place. With that, we personally are not experts. We don't position ourselves as experts when it comes to equity work. We are learning, we are learners, and we want to continue to be viewed as learners. We're trying out these strategies for ourselves, but we wanted to share what we were learning with others and to help build a community around equitable communications, so that we could all learn from each other. And so we also want to disclaim here that we do not suggest that this is a substitute for bias trainings. We don't suggest this is a substitute for data equity guidelines or employing anti-racist strategies. This is a supplement. We feel that all of these important parts of practice should continue, but we recognize that you can't communicate biased data equitably. And so this is what this resource is for. We have a lot to learn from you, so I hope that I don't talk too long so that I can hear a little bit from what you have experienced as well. So, all right. So here are the 4 guideposts that we share in our guide for communicating equitably. These, again, were conducted from extensive research, or were collected from extensive research from diverse fields and sources. But if you notice, and you'll see as we go through them, they're not just check list things to do to communicate equitably. These are mindset shifts. So these really address the internal thinking and the internal ways that we are feeling about equity. How can we ensure that our thoughts and feelings truly align with what we are working towards so that we can be successful when it comes to communicating equitably? And so we're going to go deep into these. We're excited because we haven't gotten to go deep yet. So hopefully, I'm going to try not to go on long tangents, but yes, this is very exciting. Guidepost 1 is to develop a practice of self-reflection. This is very important because, as we said before, and as you'll hear throughout, equitable communications is a learning journey, and you don't stumble into it. You don't do it on accident. It's intentional, and it's very self-reflective, meaning your internal conversations, you're being honest with yourself about what you're really thinking and feeling. I do this with myself all the time. So we must be willing to challenge our preconceived notions and even intentionally re-educate ourselves when we're embarking on this journey. But there are ways, believe it or not, there are very strategic ways that we can extend our re-education beyond textbooks. We don't just have to academically approach this. We can really intentionally approach this, and it helps us to coexist with others in all aspects of our life. So let's get into some strategies. So there are 2 big ones, and I'll go deep into one so that you don't have the whole hour of me talking. Strategy 1 is to get curious about yourself and others so we can communicate more equitably, of course, by understanding ourselves and those around us. But this helps us to understand how our communications could affect those that we are engaging with, just by understanding their experience. And this can involve like deeply reflecting on what other experiences have been like, cultural histories. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But it's just very important to make sure that we are aware of some of the history before we communicate on behalf, or hopefully with those, with the communities that we're working with. And then again, acknowledge your own limitations. This is not easy work, and it's not seamless work. We are going to hit that rock. We're going to trip a couple of times as we're learning. This requires humility, knowing that we won't get it right, but having a desire to get it right and to learn from our mistakes. So yeah, let's circle back to get curious about yourself. This is one of my favorites because it's really fun. Learning about other cultures is fun, and learning about your culture it's fun. It's like going back to elementary school and going to all the different field trips, but as an adult and with intention. It's a lot of fun. And so there are some specific ways that we can learn about others. I love these ideas listed here. Local museums, as Heather mentioned, my background is in libraries, so I had a unique opportunity to learn about different cultures because I was immersed in the library world through reading culturally diverse books. I love culturally diverse films. That is so fun. And you come out of these experiences almost always thinking, I did not know that. But that lesson translates into a sensitivity that you now have for a different cultural experience that you might not have had you not been immersed in that culture. And so we think this is such an important, these are such important ways to get connected with other cultures, and also just to be able to experience the world fully around us. I do want to emphasize the hot tip of respecting differences. There are some ways that this is experienced uncomfortably, so we can be cautious too about how we approach learning about other cultures. We're not coming in demanding that we be seen and heard, and we're coming in with a genuine interest in learning. So respecting those differences at the same time is very important. All right. This is another one that I'm sure you have heard before. I think about treat others how, well, it's a little different. We changed it to treat others how they want to be treated rather than treat others how you want to be treated. But I recall hearing this my whole life. My mother used to tell me this all the time. It sounds easy. That's deceptive. It's not. It is so, so, so important. But this is such a wonderful opportunity as professionals in whatever role that we're in. I'm thinking of myself as an evaluator and how this provides an opportunity for us to demonstrate respect. We can show that we care by recognizing and appreciating the experiences of others and how these experiences affect how they see the world. We have that ability. And so we definitely want to take advantage of that. And this is the way that we can do it. Let's jump into the 3 strategies here. Strategy 1 is to respect your audience's experiences. We're going to get pretty deep into that one. But basically, what we're talking about here is being mindful of systemic oppression and how it has created challenges for certain groups that are not experienced in other groups. Their experiences shape how they view the world. I often think, even now, I've learned lessons about myself as an adult when I reflect back on things that I did as a child. And it was because of my experiences. And so it's just knowing that the way that we move about the world is based off of the things that we've experienced. Strategy 2 is also incredibly important, respecting each dimension of a person's identity. I love this because I feel like this conversation has come up a lot lately and continues to come up. Every group has groups and groups and groups of people within that group. There are multiple dimensions of a person's identity. And again, each of those identities affect the person's overall experience in the world. And so we can respect that intersectional lens. It's so important to be able to show and respect someone's multidimensional experiences. And then make content easy to find, understand, and use. Give information back in a way that it can be received. Accessibility is so incredibly important. I don't want to go too long. I feel myself going too long. Let's dig into respect your audience's experience. I have so many stories just coming up. So here are the 4 tips that you can use when it comes to respecting your audience's experience. Again, each person has a whole history of life that they're living within. We can respect that experience. One is to use asset-based framing. And this is so important because it humanizes the person. I'm thinking of some of my public health background, but we don't want to limit any individual to a condition. We don't want to limit them to, even now, the discussion about using the term marginalized or using the term oppressed. That can be controversial. We don't want to limit someone to a negative framing when they have so much positive experiences as well, so much humanity. And so by using that positive language, the human language that helps them to be defined by the positive and their whole self is very, very important. Focus on behavior or condition, not labels. So avoiding stereotyping, but highlighting again one's humanity rather than limiting them to that one aspect of their life and not applying a label. As a quick example, I have a 7-year-old daughter who is autistic, and I've been reading a lot of articles about how the autism community wants to be. It's a variable, right? Everyone has a different view on how they want to be designated, but it's something that's been front and center in my mind. I see my daughter and I don't see autism. I see Ryan, and she's a lot. She's got a whole lot of personality, and she also is autistic. And so now I'm thinking about how those labels could box one in without allowing you to really see the full person. And so we have that opportunity when we're sharing out any kind of reporting. We can be very mindful of how we word things. I think 3 almost could be 1. It could come up to the top, because when you ask, again, my background is in research. Autonomy is huge. Building power by creating choice. That is a big deal. Any question that you may have, I can assure you the response is very clear whenever you ask someone. They'll tell you how they want to be designated. We had a visual that talked about the use of the term African American versus Black. There's a conversation around Latinx versus Latina. There's a lot of conversation. So by asking, we can build in supports in or just language in our report to make sure that everyone is considered. And lastly, but not least, nonviolent language. So again, we're talking about our audience's experience. And this is hard because so much of our language is rooted in violent rhetoric. Like if you just Googling it, it's like, oh, everything that we say sounds quite violent in nature. And we've been saying it for so long, we don't think about it, but there are people who have had violent experiences who have visceral reactions to those words. So these are just some of the things that we can think about before we share out what we're sharing out with the community. We've even had an experience with a colleague who we changed a report. We used waves in the report, and it triggered her because of her own experience with natural disasters. We hadn't thought about it. And so again, hit that rock, big toe hits the rock, ouch, it hurts. Let's change the report. We learn, keep moving. But it shows so much respect for our colleagues and ultimately our community whenever we take that kind of care.
Thanks, Shelley. We have 2 more guideposts to share with you. And the third one is centering marginalized people, voices, and experiences. And the reality is a lot of time in our data work, it is our voices who have a lot of power in the way that we're communicating out our findings, the way that we're choosing to tell the stories of the people who are part of our evaluation. And often the stories that we're telling are those of people who are marginalized, right? These are people whose stories have often been ignored in the past. There's a reason that they're part of our social change work that we're doing. And so the most important thing that we can do to ensure our communications are equitable is to use our power that we have to amplify the voices of those people whose stories that we're telling and who were able to share their stories with us. And so there are kind of 2 concrete strategies that we learned about in how to do this practically in our research. And one is really just stepping aside, right? Letting people so marginalized voices can be heard. And that means that people from marginalized backgrounds can be the lead. Like we don't always have to be the person who is in the room talking to a finder, who is presenting data. Like doesn't have to be us. Like are there ways and ethical opportunities for marginalized people to be sharing back data directly? That's not always practical or ethical given the circumstances. So in scenarios where that's not possible, you can also ask people how they want to be recognized in your work, right? Giving them a chance to give feedback and weigh in on what it means and what it looks like and how they're portrayed. Right. Some of this means being curious, listening, observing, feeling like you have a connection to those stories and what's around them so that you can authentically represent them. And it's also maintaining the emotional intensity of people's experiences. And we'll talk about that a little deeper in a second. A second strategy to consider is compensating and sharing learnings with the contributors themselves. We're talking a lot about compensation, I think, in the data world, compensating people for their data and stories. And that is true as well if you're working with others to support how you're communicating out their stories, right? So paying them for that time, for that experience. We're also talking about directing communications to audiences with lived experiences. In our work, a lot of the time we're working with funders and doing evaluations of grantees. And I think that brings up a lot of challenges for us in navigating some of those conversations. So that everything that we create is not just directed to the funder, right? There's so much amazing, great knowledge and information and inspiration in the stories that we've collected through our evaluation and research, and they can benefit from that. So they should also be a primary audience. And honestly, like one thing to think about through all of this is just creating platforms that amplify people who are most affected by the work and not exploiting people, right? So if you center that as the value and that is your North Star, I think that can make a really big difference in all of your communications. And just centering that and thinking about that in your work. So I do want to dig a little deeper into this emotional intensity point, part of that first strategy. So often when we use people's stories as data, those stories can become very watered down, right? Like feelings are removed from the findings to emphasize the facts. And so I think that it would be great if we could try to stop doing that, because we aren't telling that authentic story. And so like one anecdote I have about this is I was once working on a case study of a community advocacy group, and they were a group of volunteers who had a really negative experience with a program lead, to the point that they really felt that lead's actions felt harmful to them and their role as volunteers. And I was able to share a draft back of this case study with them before it went to our funder. And even though I had included some of those challenges of the program lead, the volunteers were pretty upset about the case study because they really didn't feel heard through it. It didn't feel like this was representative of their experience. So thankfully, I had that opportunity to kind of share this draft with them before it went anywhere else, and they were able to help me make corrections to it in a way that felt more authentic and true to them. But I think, that it shows how that emotional intensity is part of the data that you have in telling a true and honest story. And the final guidepost that we have from our research is to use anti-racist narratives to further equity. So really, we can use language and images to shift minds and behaviors towards more equitable practices, right? So in other words, we're using communications as a tool to advance equity. And there are two strategies we learned from our research to do this. And one is I kind of started to get at is telling that whole honest story, being explicit about race and the role of race, talking about current historical context and systems. So you have a holistic picture, right, of the whole system, the individual, as well as like those other layers involved in problems, talking about root causes, all of that holistic insight into issues, like all of that needs to be represented. And also making sure we're capturing the positive and not just the negative, which is so common, I think, as we're working on social issues in our field. And the second strategy is creating solidarity by finding common threads. So this is particularly important in politicized climates and our increasingly polarized society, unfortunately, and it is an election year, so we're going to be seeing a lot of it. But ways to create solidarity can be leading with values, right? Those are things that a lot of people can get behind and can find common ground on, creating like that broader vision for better worlds that people can sign on to together. It also can mean, trying to create something that feels relatable, right? So sharing personal stories and building connections, showing those feelings. So you're not talking about something kind of in a broad sense, but you're able to connect with a human experience. and that can create some solidarity and connection. And lastly is, unfortunately, the reality is that there are a lot of people who are implementing wedge strategies. If you've heard of that concept, where there are people who are trying to divide people to support their cause. And if we want to use communications in an equitable way, we want to do the opposite of that. We want to be choosing messages that bring connections between groups, and not pit people against each other. And there is one way that we can talk about in terms of telling the honest and true story, and that is telling stories that inspire. And I'm going to ask Shelly actually to share a little bit more about this, because she can speak to it so much better than I can.
I don't know about that, but I just this is a conversation that we had a lot, just thinking about what the effect that inspirational stories have. When you were talking and sharing information with communities that have been marginalized, and you're talking about the things that they're facing as part of their marginalization, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. It's worrisome. It can cause anxiety. Commonly hearing about, as an example, oppressive narratives about gun violence in Black communities. I have a visceral reaction to that. And part of the reason why isn't that we don't have work to do. And so that's part of where our conversations came in. We have to talk about these things. We have work to do. But these stories often ignore the efforts that are being done. There's a lot of community mobilization that's happening. There's a lot of work that has been done, and a lot of strength that you see within the Black community when they are addressing their own community needs. And that isn't being told. There's also wonderful positive stories in every community that's often being just overlooked, and these negative stories are prioritized. But when we are emphasizing solutions, and some of the solutions are looking at what the community efforts are. They are the ones that know their community. They know how to solve and address the issue. And it's amazing to see the work that's being done. When those stories are highlighted, the mobilization and collective action as a result is amazing. And so just emphasizing the positive too. And then that also takes some of the weight off of your colleagues who are also tired of hearing about these negative stories about their own. They have family members, they have people in their home that are tied to these stories. They have their own connection to these stories. My energy is probably coming off. It's very heavy to hear about the harm that's going on in communities and not hear the positive. Or as my family would call it, the Black excellence stories that they would always tell. So it's just important to balance that and be mindful of the effects that the negative stories have. And that can also help to yield the positive results that we're all looking for.
Yeah. Thank you, Shelly. Yeah, and so I know we want to have a little time for questions. There are just two more points that I want to make to bring some of these strategies in today's context. And the first is the reality that AI is invading our lives. And it honestly is an amazing communications tool. We use it all the time to support our writing. And I actually think it can support equity sometimes. Like, one way I like to use it is to ask it to help me remove jargon and use more simplified language. But there are also some really critical ethical concerns around AI that are important to note. And one that I want to highlight in this space is that AI really relies on what has already been done. It's taken from like past data, and if we're trying to create a new world and a new way of doing things, then AI cannot do that for us. So it can be a helpful tool in some ways, but absolutely we should not trust it. And we should add our own research and input into it if we want to create something new and better in our world. And lastly, I know this is a lot of information and there's like way more even kind of through our research and in the guide. This is just kind of scraping some of the surface of what we've learned. But we also want to recognize that there are different contexts that you're working in and ability to employ some of these strategies. So first of all, just by being here is amazing and trying to learn. I love this community and it's so great to always challenge our own thinking and continue to learn. So just having that interest in challenging your thinking, I think is amazing. But also there are different places where you can start in your work, right? Like we are, as a consulting group, are constantly having conversations with our clients and trying to navigate, what can we do within these strategies and working on ways to, hopefully use this guide even as an advocacy tool with them to talk about the benefits of communicating equitably and having reports that just don't go to them, but also, having time and energy towards, products that are geared around their grantees. So we're just starting to use some of these lessons from the guide and are learning them. And we are so interested to hear if all of you have any specific examples from your work too, because I think we probably have a lot to learn from what you're doing in your work as well. But with that, here's the link and it might be in the chat too to our guide. And I'm so grateful to be here and would love to have any questions that you have for us. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alyssa and Shelley. That was fantastic. And the content is so, so cool and so well presented. The thinking and the narrative and the illustrations are so, so well aligned. It is just a real pleasure to see this. And absolutely, the link is in the chat there. And we'll also continue to supply you with the link so that everybody can find it. Although in the chat, you'll be happy to hear that some people are already way ahead of us and using it. So
I can't wait
with
to hear.
positive
Yeah.
reviews, yes. Yeah, so we do have some time for some live Q&A. There's some questions already in the chat. If you want to put a question in the chat, you can go ahead and do that. You can either put it to everyone, or if you feel shy and want to ask a question, but you don't want your name to be used, you can just put my name, Heather Kraus, in the drop down, and you can ask it privately to me, and I'll ask your question without using your name. But who is in the room that would like to turn their mic on? If you would like to either share an example or ask a question, simply raise your hand. You can do that using the reaction button in Zoom, or you can just turn your microphone on. If you can't figure out the reaction button, don't worry about it. Anybody in the room want to ask a question or make a comment?
I might turn the slideshow down so we can see each other's faces.
Excellent. All right. While we wait for people in the room to raise their hands or turn their mics on, there's some great questions in the chat. Recently, someone has said, I have been doing a lot more data analysis with mostly survey data with a task force group on the population that we are surveying. I'm wondering what language around consent and privacy folks are putting in the survey when you know that there will be multiple eyes on the data in the analysis process. This is such a great question. What a fantastic question. It's such a good illustration of the unintentional consequences that we really need to think very carefully about when we're doing something that we hope moves us towards equity. Do you folks have any ideas about that, Shelley or Alyssa?
Nope, Shelley, you're on mute.
No, I was still processing the question and thinking about it. We have a colleague that we presented this with who would have some really great feedback on that specific language. But yeah, I'm still processing. Do you want to start us off, Alyssa?
Sure. Yeah. And Heather, I know you have a lot of thoughts about this too. But we do a lot of research in like small sample sizes actually, and also have the value of sharing back findings. And so we do find it like so important to be really clear and honest about how data will be shared. And so we just try to be really explicit about that and communicate that in multiple ways, in multiple channels, because we know if we just put it in the survey, maybe they won't get it. But if we're, make sure it's in the email as it goes out, if it's verbally communicated as you're announcing to expect the email with the survey, and just clarifying exactly what to expect. So in our small sample sizes, like some language that we'll use is like, please know that there will be a small sample size, and be aware that, while we will be consolidating data across, your community, like that there might be something that's identifiable there, right? Because, and we know that that might affect the data that come in, that, maybe folks won't feel as open to sharing something because of that. So we know that is a risk, but we also feel like if that's so important that they have the choice for what they're able to share.
Yeah. I love the last part. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's a similar response that I'll often get is like, but if we're more transparent, we'll get less data. I'm like, yeah, that's called informed consent.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another comment actually from somebody who I know has a lot of experience in this area, with surveys also being really clear if it's anonymous versus confidential, talking about how data might be used, who might have access to it, especially the row level data. How is data presented to others, what you do to help data privacy. Thank you so much for sharing that list. I think that that's a really, really helpful list about the level of non-technical facts that should just be, bottom line best practices. Again, like, this doesn't matter if you care about equity. This matters if you care about equity, and or if you care about, just like minimum viable product.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking as a supplement to Alyssa's statement that we recently had the opportunity to, and we'd like to make sure that we give that data back as well. So then people can see what they've shared, and they can tell us what they're comfortable with sharing out. And that is also something, just again, opportunities to provide as much autonomy as possible.
Yeah. That's I love just how do we provide as much autonomy as possible is a great idea. Really, really active conversation going on in the chat about examples of the nonviolent language. And Alyssa's just adding a comment there, which I really appreciate. And if you want some other examples, hop into the chat. There are some great ones.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to say that there's a lot of guidance around there that does get into the language specific. So we didn't go into like, here is a table with one word and an alternative. Those do exist out there. So I did drop in a link with like some examples around nonviolent language, which is like so helpful and important, especially for folks who have experienced trauma. But this is also very true, I think, if you're thinking about specific populations, and many of you probably already know this, but often any population that you're working with, there is a guide that exists about, how they prefer to have like what is the language around that group, and like the language related to, and relevant to that group, right? So that's always something, and that's always evolving too. So it's a good first place to start looking before you're, right? Like you shouldn't have to like lean on your audience at all times if you can do that original research first. For example, I work in the child welfare space, and I'm learning like, oh, okay, like they're starting to call what used to be termed foster parents, resource parents, right? So there's always an evolution in language. And so that's a good first place to start to see kind of where they're at.
That's such a cool example. Thank you for sharing that example. And there's another conversation really active in the chat about what to do when you have a group like that has a variety of opinions on, not every foster parent is going to want to be called a resource parent. And that's just one example of hundreds. What to do? How do we land on a name? And of course, one of the first things to do is say out loud or write down a sentence that says, there is no unanimous name. This is the way we made the decision.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Heather, is like, you're never going to please everyone. Like, that's just not a reality. Like, because everyone is unique and has their own unique connection to different words and terms. And what you can do is you can try to find like the best answer and have a rationale for it with what you're using in your report. And then I'll add too, like, try to be honest and true to the individual as well. So if you're quoting someone and referencing them as like a specific person, like if they have a specific preference, like maybe check in with them about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. If you're talking about an individual, sorry, Shelley, go
Right.
ahead.
Oh no, that I was agreeing with that, and I was thinking that because I'm thinking about all of the slashes that we have now, like this slash slash, which is kind of covering everybody's preference of what they're looking for. But I agree that if you have the opportunity to place or share back what you're thinking before you begin your collections, if we're talking about a survey, being able to say, does this work? We have that often in our context where we can share with our like funders or with even those that we are going to ultimately be collecting from. We can get their information first and kind of vet how they feel about it. That's not always true in everyone's circumstance. So I think being able to have a disclaimer of this is how we landed, that transparency is really wonderful, and it helps to mitigate some of the feelings of being imposed upon too.
That is so true. Okay, we probably have time for one more short question. And I think we're going to go to one from that a few people have touched on in a variety of different ways, which is, have you had any success figuring out what to do about presenting at some of like the more prestigious places, like maybe a conference or maybe a funder led gathering or an all hands where they're, for ethical reasons, for resource reasons, you can't actually have people in the room who are presented by the data. Do you generally just turn down those opportunities, or have you found a solution for that?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. We
Yeah.
are having that conversation ourselves. I don't think we have like a good solid answer. I think, yeah, we are struggling because, often, we like to go to American Evaluation Association conference every year, and it's very wonky, right? Like it's it's data people. And it's like not a great space to invite a lot of the grantees who are contributing their stories. So we often have conversations among our team of like how, like, we want to have them, but also like, how would we do that in a way that is not extractive? And we don't have a good solution yet. So we have not invited those community members. We have kind of gotten some of their like feedback and input into what we've presented and like kind of gotten sign off. And by they, it's usually like a couple of representatives, I'll say too. Like, I don't know if like we haven't figured out a way to be more like holistic about it, I think. And I think it's a really great question and definitely something that we're navigating right now.
Yeah, just to jump on that, we're currently, a practical example, we're working on developing a tool that we have gotten feedback from community members on directly. It's been such a wonderful, exciting experience. And we conducted a design meeting, held them with community members, and we regard them as co-designers. But what we do when we get to that, because I agree, there's a roadblock between developing something and then going to AEA and sharing it. There's like a roadblock between those two parts. But I do think that right now we are trying our best to make sure that we are very transparent early on about what we're going to do and what we're going to say. And even saying, this is where we're going to go next with this data. This is who is going to see the findings from this process. This is where it's going next. Ideally, because it did come up, which is why I mentioned it, as asking, can we invite a design meeting participant to the conference? So my hope is that we will get to that point where we are bringing people with us, because it is their data. So ideally that's where we would like to be.
That's such a cool idea. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking that question. And then for your sharing about maybe even getting through that barrier this very year. That would be cool. Okay, we need to leave it there. I know these hours go incredibly fast. So huge thank you to Shelly and Alyssa. I really, really appreciate you, first of all, making this guide. It is so cool. And then for being so generous as to come and share your guide with us. Really, really appreciate that. And also thanks to all of you who come and join the Talking Data Equity community and ask your questions and share your resources and thoughts. It, of course, wouldn't be the same without you. And so have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a good weekend. And I will see you next Friday. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.